Most brand collapses get remembered as market failures, the wrong product, the wrong timing, the wrong price point. But sometimes a brand gets almost everything right from a product standpoint and it still falls apart. That's the American Apparel story. And honestly, it's one of the more instructive cases I've come across in a while. Welcome to the IADS Retail Park. I'm Maya, and today we're unpacking a brand that was ahead of its time in almost every way that now matters in retail and still managed to implode. Joining me to dig into this is Anchita Ranka, Head of Analysis and Perspectives here at IADS. Hi, Anchita.
Hi, Maya. I have to say, when you first described this exclusive to me, the American Apparel case, I wasn't expecting it to have quite so many layers. Because on the surface, it reads like a founder scandal story, but you're arguing it's actually something bigger than that.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's so easy to file this under controversial founder does controversial things and company pays the price, and that did happen. But what I kept coming back to while researching this was that the governance failure and the brand's cultural brilliance were almost running in parallel. American Apparel was genuinely ahead of the curve. We're talking about a company that had 239 stores across 20 countries by 2015, around 10,000 employees, and a fully vertically integrated manufacturing operation in downtown Los Angeles. The average factory worker there was earning between $80 and $120 a day at a time when other LA garment factories were paying $30 to $40. Workers got subsidized lunches, healthcare, English classes, transit passes. This was before ethical production was something brands put in their marketing decks.
And alongside all of that, before any of this was standard marketing language, the brand's external identity, the campaigns, those were doing something quite different too.
The advertising leaned hard into it. Deliberately lo fi, unretouched, often featuring actual employees or people cast off the street. No glossy perfection. And this was the mid 2000s, so it stood out sharply. There was a real rejection of what mainstream fashion looked like. The brand carried this whole identity around Los Angeles, youth culture, anti corporate energy, and people bought into it, literally. The clothes were basically elevated basics t shirts, hoodies, leggings, bodysuits, but they carried all of this cultural weight. It felt like buying a worldview, not just a cotton t shirt.
So, where does it start to break down? Because reading your exclusive, it sounds like the same things that made the brand so compelling were also what made it fragile.
That tension is what the exclusive kept circling back to. The brand's identity was inseparable from one person, Dov Charney. His aesthetic, his politics, his instincts, his behavior, and in the early days of a founder led company, that kind of concentrated creative energy reads as authenticity. But when you're operating 239 stores across 20 countries with 10,000 employees, that same concentration becomes a serious governance exposure. By 2014, the company's annual report was already showing total net sales falling to $608.9 million dollars from $633.9 million dollars the year before, and a net loss of $68.8 million. Dollars. And then Charney was suspended as president, CEO, and chairman in June of that year after an ongoing investigation into alleged misconduct. What made the suspension particularly alarming for the business was that the SEC filing warned that the management changes may have triggered an event of default on the company's credit agreements. Lenders were on watch because the business continuity was so tied to one individual.
You know, Maya, the capital structure piece is something I hadn't expected going in. That a personnel decision about one person's conduct could immediately become an event of default on credit agreements. What did the internal culture look like that allowed things to reach that point?
It's something I spent a lot of time on in the exclusive, and it's uncomfortable to read. Former employees describe a workplace that was genuinely energizing in some ways. People were given real responsibility early. The culture felt like being part of something larger than a clothing company. But there was a structural problem underneath all of that. Power was concentrated in a single person who controlled creative direction, hiring, brand narrative, and employee access. When career advancement and proximity to the founder are all controlled by the same individual, you end up in a place where employees may not feel they're operating on equal terms. Complaints were routed into confidential arbitration through agreements employees had signed, which meant they largely didn't surface publicly. By the time the board acted in 2014, those conditions had been building for about a decade.
And then the company filed for bankruptcy twice, right? What's left of it now?
So the first Chapter 11 filing was in 2015, a second in 2016, and then in January 2017, Gildan won the court supervised auction for the brand and certain assets, roughly $88 million, which included worldwide intellectual property rights and selected manufacturing equipment, but not the retail store assets and not the Los Angeles factory. Today's American Apparel has no stores. Its own frequently asked questions says Amazon is now its primary retail channel. The sweatshop free claim has been reworded to made in sweatshop free facilities around the world, including the US. So the Los Angeles production story, the workers as model story, the whole cultural architecture that made the name worth anything, none of that transferred. Gildan bought a name. What it couldn't buy was the business model that gave the name its meaning.
So Gildan acquired the name, but not what gave it value. I want to get to the DEI angle you develop in the exclusive, because on the surface, American Apparel looked quite progressive in a lot of ways.
That's right, it did. And that's the most instructive part of the case for the IAD S2025 white paper on DEI, which is the analytical frame I was working with. American Apparel used real workers in campaigns. It ran the Legalize LA campaign, took out political ads, gave thousands of employees paid time off to march in immigration rallies. These weren't token gestures. The political ad spending was real money. But in 2009, after an ICE audit found documentation discrepancies for about 1,800 workers, the company let them all go. The same brand that publicly championed immigrant workers dismissed them when maintaining that commitment became legally costly. The advocacy wasn't fake, but the institutional structures that would have protected it when it was tested simply weren't there. And that's the argument the white paper makes at sector level. DEI cannot function as a communications layer applied to a weak governance culture. At American Apparel, inclusion claims lived in the brand's external positioning, not in the structures behind it.
So, for department stores specifically, what does this case actually change about how you think partner brands should be evaluated?
Well, Anchita, it changes the questions you ask before signing a partnership, not after the brand makes news. American Apparel shows you what those questions should look like. How are worker conditions documented? And is there evidence beyond what the marketing says? How does the brand handle complaints when they involve a senior leader or founder? Is the business operationally dependent on one individual in ways that affect its financial stability? The interesting parallel is Los Angeles Apparel. The company Charney, founded in 2016, built on almost identical principles. Vertically integrated, domestic manufacturing, starting wages of $20 an hour, up to $35 with productivity bonuses. But during COVID, it was cited by Cal OSHA after an outbreak that resulted in over 300 infections and 4 employee deaths at its factory, even at a smaller scale without investor pressure to expand to 239 stores. The same founder accountability gap showed up. The issue goes beyond scale. It's whether the governance structures exist independently of the person running the organization.
The Los Angeles apparel detail is the one that's going to stay with me. Same founder, smaller scale, no pressure to hit over 200 stores, and the same accountability gap showed up anyway. It really drives home that a compelling brand story and a resilient institution are two very different things.
And that gap has real consequences. Values, culture, inclusion, none of it is self sustaining. At American Apparel, each of those things depended on one person's authority rather than on structures that could survive independent of him. That's the diagnostic. And if you want to go deeper on this, the full exclusive is available on the IADS Exclusive Insights Substack. The link is in the episode description. Thanks so much to Anchita for walking through this with me today, and thank you for listening. For more on this and everything else shaping department stores and retail worldwide, follow us on LinkedIn at International Association of Department Stores and visit our website. I'm Maya. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you next time on the IADS Retail Park.
Thanks to everyone tuning in. It's really worth the read if you want the full picture on this one.
Please be advised that this podcast features AI cloned voices created with human oversight.